Hello, my name is Dr. Jim Wilkie. I'm the Director of Continuing Education for Paragon Dental Practice Transitions. Thank you for joining me for this presentation titled Planning Your Practice Transition. Are you preparing for retirement? Have many unanswered questions or concerns? I will explain and show you the many options and ideas that are available to you today regarding a present or future transition of your dental practice. I also hope to help you determine the best plan for a particular situation, because there are more ways to transition a dental practice than one generally knows about. You should also know how to avoid the most common transition mistakes that many dentists make that could easily cost you many hundreds of thousands of dollars. You will learn the pros and cons of associate relationships and how an associate may or may not be in your best interest for you and your practice at certain stages of your career. And yes, I will also explain the methodology used to establish the fair market value for your dental practice. You owe it to yourself to begin educating yourself on one of your most important career decisions. But before I begin this presentation, I'd like to talk briefly about the company I represent, Paragon Dental Practice Transitions. We are a national transition company with our corporate office located near Jackson, Mississippi. We have approximately 50 transition consultants around the United States. Some consultants handle multiple states. Some states have multiple consultants. We are a full-service, dual representation transition company, providing dentists with very detailed and comprehensive practice analysis and appraisals. We use and provide to our clients, as part of our services, very complete and time-tested contract packages. We keep total confidentiality throughout the entire transition, and we provide financing assistance to our clients using a number of very fine national and local financing sources. We handle every aspect of the transition, from our very first complimentary consultation to the final closing and thereafter. We stay involved in the post-closing for as long as our clients and their staff need us. Our primary goal is always to put together a fair and equitable transition for both buyers and sellers alike. With that in mind, let's get started with our presentation today. So let's begin by saying in this presentation, I'll be talking with you about the many transition options and ideas that are available to you both today and throughout your dental career. I hope you'll gain some valuable knowledge from the information I'll be providing you here in this presentation. I also hope to show you how to increase your personal wealth in terms of both dollars and quality of life. Let's begin by saying that a practice transition is not always about retirement. I think many dentists think that they only think about a transition when they get near retirement. That's really not true. Actually, most dental transitions have nothing to do with retirement. Dental transition occurs for the sole purpose of satisfying a dentist's specific need and goal. I think it's important to understand that you can do a transition at any time of your dental career, from the time you graduate from dental school. Let's say by the time you're 25 to 28 years old, when most dentists graduate from dental school, until the time that you are near retirement at 65 or 70 years old. You can start and buy a practice right out of dental school. You can become involved in a co-ownership situation. Possibly during the 30s and 40s age, you might be involved in a practice merger. Maybe when you're in the middle of your career, you might have a very large practice looking to bring a partner in. Maybe when you're nearing maybe in your 50s and getting closer to retirement, maybe you'd like to possibly bring an associate into your practice, and then near retirement, maybe sell and transition out. So transitions can happen at any age of your career, and they don't always have to be involved with retirement. So there are many issues that one should consider when considering a transition. So let's take a short self-examination and look at a few factors that should impact the decision for you to make a change in your dental practice. Has your practice stopped growing? I think a very important question here, and I think we see many dentists around the country whose practices are not growing any longer due to the economy. Has your practice already peaked? Are you tired of practicing alone? Do you need more patients? I think most dentists will tell me that they always need more patients in their practice. Do you need more freedom? Do you need more time away from the daily grind? Do you hate dealing with employee issues? I don't think anybody particularly likes that. Are you being forced to accept lower fees? I think we're seeing as the economy changes and a lot of these companies change, that they're being forced to accept lower fees and more PPO plans. Is your practice overhead increasing every year? Is your practice income on a decline? Are you feeling more stress? Do you need to earn more money? Are you having to advertise more and more to attract those patients in your practice? Very important questions. Do you have a desire to be a mentor? Possibly take a younger dentist and teach them some of your skills, both in running your business and being a good dentist. Do you need more time with your family? Would you like to be in a financial position to retire? I mean, the last two questions are very, very important. Are you burned out on dentistry? Do you really feel being tired of the daily grind and dentistry in general? And I think the last question is the most important. Are you unhappy at this stage of your career and of your life with your dental profession? If you've answered yes to many of these questions, then I'm here today to share some ideas that may dramatically change your life for the better. So before I go any farther, though, I'd like to familiarize you with some of the many transition options that are available to you throughout your dental career. The reason I'm doing this very early in the presentation is I'm going to be talking about certain terminology, certain transition terms as I progress through the presentation. And I think it's very, very important that you understand these terms. So when I do talk about certain transition options, you'll be familiar with them. So let's go through these briefly, and I'll explain each one of them. The true transition term that Paragon uses is something called a walk-away sale. And I would think that probably somewhere between 30 and 40% of our transitions are what we call walk-away sales. It's basically like selling your house. It's where you sell your practice today and you leave tomorrow. Normally these sellers are either retiring or relocating to some other spot in the country. Sadly, far too often, dentists wait till they near retirement age before they consider selling. And sadly, because of this, their practices have declined significantly in terms of both production and collections. So obviously, when they have less production and collections, their fair market value has also declined. This is the one true transition option that we do have in dentistry, where basically it talks about retirement immediately. It's called a walk-away sale. The second transition option that Paragon offers to our clients is something called a pre-sale. And a pre-sale is where you sell your practice today, but you remain with the practice as the purchaser's associate for a period of time as mutually agreed upon by both parties. There's no set time period for the stay. Typically it's 5 years or less. Some dentists would like to stay for a few weeks, a few months. Some may stay for a year or two. And quite interestingly, Paragon has had a client that sold his practice and has been an associate in this practice for a 15-year time period. We do approximately 30% of our transitions to 40% in what we call pre-sales. And again, this is a situation where you sell today, but you stay on in the practice for a period of time. We'll be talking more about pre-sales later in this presentation. We do another type of transition option called practice mergers, and I would say we probably do 5% to 10% of our transitions in practice mergers. This occurs when an existing practice owner purchases another dentist practice near their location and merges the two practices together into one practice in one location with the one owner. Ideally, the offices which should be less than 5 miles apart, and most ideally, the ideal situation, the practice they purchased were within a mile or two of their office. In a merger, the buyer can move their practice into the seller's location. The seller happens to have a better area of town or maybe a larger office or better equipment. Or on the contrary, the merger buyer may purchase the seller's practice and move it into their location, transferring over the equipment and the staff and the patients and the production over to their office. Merger buyers are often very experienced, and they always have a very easy time getting financing for these transitions. The sale can be structured either as a walk-away sale, where the seller of the merger practice would immediately leave and not join the merger practice, or it could be structured as a pre-sale, where the merger seller would move with the practice to the new location and would join the practice and help to transfer patients and staff, and may stay for a period of time, and again, is mutually agreed upon by both parties. Maybe a short time, it could be a longer time. So that's another transition option we see that many dentists do throughout their career. We're seeing more and more consolidations. We don't do many of these, but we do a small percentage called consolidation, is when 2 or more practice owners combine their practices together into one single multi-owner group practice. Unlike a merger, these practice owners become equal co-owners of the larger consolidated practice. So in a merger situation, you have one owner of two practices. In a consolidation, you'd have two owners of the two practices, and they become equal partners of the practice. That's called a consolidation. Paragon has a program which we call a co-op, or it's a co-ownership acquisition program. And a co-op is when a doctor sells an equal ownership interest in his or her dental practice. The sale is immediate. The two doctors continue to grow the practice together. Ownership income is a combination of provider income based upon the production of both doctors, and the profit distributions based upon equal co-ownership. So the ideal situation for dentists who's in the middle of their career, who has a very, very large practice, actually has so many patients and there's so much dentistry to be done in their practice, they're looking for another set of doctor hands. And so they would bring a partner into their practice and sell them a 50% share of the practice. If it's an extremely large practice, which we see sometimes, they may be looking for two partners, and they would sell a 33 1/3 share to the other two buyers, and they would each become 1/3 owners of the large practice. So these are called a co-op or a co-ownership acquisition programs, and we do about 5% of our transitions in co-op programs. Several years ago, Paragon found a need to find a program or develop a program where a younger, less experienced dentist was thinking of joining a very large practice. Obviously, as a young dentist coming out of dental school or not being out very long, their production capabilities are just not there, and they cannot be an equal co-owner because they can't produce the same amount of dentistry as the host doctor. So Paragon developed a program called the POP program, and the POP is a combination of associate and co-ownership plan. The new co-owner comes into practice as an associate with a formal contract that leads to equal practice ownership. The buy-ins are based in stages based upon the production level of the associate versus the production level of the host doctor. It's very similar to the co-op, but structured at a much slower pace. So what happens is the younger doctor comes in as the associate, and as the production increases, they get more and more shares of the business until they become equal co-owners. Our contract says at the end of 5 years, they have to become the equal co-owner. We find many young associates, after just a year or two, their production increases so much they become equal co-owners of the practice. So this is kind of a program that's designed for a more inexperienced dentist, a younger dentist, who, again, had limited production capabilities, wanting to join a very, very large practice. So this is called a POP program, or a progressive ownership program. As the baby boomers age, I think we're seeing more ownership redemption programs coming on. We do a fair share percentage of these. This occurs when one or more owners of a multi-owner group practice desires to sell their ownership interest. The transition can be structured either as a sale back to the other owner or owners of the practice, or to a new owner of the practice, where we're looking at somebody to buy the selling dentist, redeeming shares of stock to a new dentist. So it's an ownership redemption, and this is a situation we have a group practice, and one person decides to leave the practice and to retire or relocate, and looking to sell or transfer their shares of stock out of the corporation. And final, our transition options we have is something called a deferred transition, and these are all of the above, but we delay the closing for a reason. The reason could be a financing reason, it could be a tax reason, it could be a licensing reason. But basically, we defer the closing, so basically we just have a little extra time in there. And any of these transitions above can have deferred transitions, or deferred closings. So these are the very basic transition programs that Paragon offers our clients. And as we talk about walk-away sales or pre-sales or merger sales down the road, I think you'll be able to understand these a little bit better. So in everybody's life, there are 3 certain things that are going to happen. Obviously, all of us are going to die someday. We're all responsible for our taxes, and everybody who's watching this presentation here will have a practice transition sometime in their dental career. The best time to transition to practice is when you're in the vertical position, and when you're standing upright and very healthy and making very good logical decisions. But sadly, and far too often, we get involved with transitions where the dentist has passed away and is in a horizontal position. These are very, very difficult transitions to deal with because they have to be done very quickly, and they're not ideal. So for the sake of your family and your patients and your staff, we hope that you choose the former over the latter. We do get involved in a number of estate sales, and again, they're very difficult transitions, especially in more rural practices where there are not many dentists in the area. It's very, very difficult to find a buyer for these type of practices. So please choose the former. Do it while you're standing upright and very healthy and can make good decisions rather than having the alternative. This next slide in the presentation is called a dental professional life cycle. All of you will find yourself somewhere in this life cycle, and over on the left-hand side, it begins with graduation. Now, we all graduate from dental school at different ages, but somewhere between, let's say, 25 and 28 years old on an average. So let's just, for ease of explanation, say that we all graduate from dental school around 25 years old. For the first 10 to 15 years of our career, from the time we're 25 to about 40, dentists are involved in something called the growth phase of your career. Now, you may be growing your own practice, you may be involved in a group practice and you're buying in. Maybe you're trying to grow your existing practice by bringing an associate in. Maybe you're working more days. You're possibly doing all your specialty procedures, all your endo, all your perio, all your oral surgery. Maybe you're taking only 2 weeks vacation. Possibly you're working several Saturdays, evenings. You're doing everything you can to grow your career, basically. And so up until you're around 40, dentists work very, very hard. They've got a lot of dental school loans to be paid off. They have a lot of expenses, and they tend to work very hard to grow their careers. Around 40 years old to about 65, Paragon finds that dentists' careers begin to level off. We call this the maturity phase of a dental career. And it happens again between 40 and 65. And what happens during the maturity phase is that certain years your production and collections are up, and certain years the production and collections are down. But you're not into this growth phase. And what we mean by that is there's something we call the solo economic threshold. And what do I mean by that? Well, your free time becomes more important to you than money. So what does that mean? Well, in the growth phase, when you were working 5 days a week or 5.5 days a week, now maybe you've cut down to 4 days a week. Possibly you were working evenings, and now you've cut down where you're working no evening. Maybe you're starting to refer out more of that specialty work, like the endodontics, the oral surgery, maybe the pedodontics, where basically you don't want to work on the children anymore. So what's happening is that you're spending more free time, and money isn't quite as important to you. Possibly you're taking more vacations. Where in the growth phase you were taking just 1 or 2 weeks a year, maybe now you're taking 4 to 6 weeks a year on vacation time. You're just working less. So what happens is the dentist's careers begin to level off, and they basically just aren't working quite as hard. In around 65, Paragon finds that dentists get into what we call the decline phase of their career. And what happens in this phase is that where they were maybe working 3 or 4 days a week during maturity phase, now they cut down to 2 days a week. Maybe they stop seeing new patients. Maybe they start referring all their specialty procedures out of the office, all their oral surgery, all their endodontics, all their pedodontics. Everything is being sent out. Maybe they cut back on staff. Maybe the patients are not as numerous as they were during the maturity phase. And sadly, dentists' careers begin to go down quite dramatically until basically there's nothing left of these practices. So I'm sure everybody watching this presentation will find yourself somewhere in this dental professional life cycle, and you'll be able to see where you are in your careers. So making the right decision at the right time throughout your professional life cycle could be very difficult. But luckily, the dental profession does provide you with many valuable options throughout your career. So let's take a look at a few of those options. I'm not going to spend much time on this one. When we all graduated from dental school, whatever age it was when you graduated, we all did one of these. We went to the military, we went to the specialty school. Some more often nowadays, we see residency programs, which are very prominent around the country. Maybe you just became an associate in an office. Maybe you started a practice from scratch. Possibly you purchased a practice. Maybe you got involved with a large group practice and bought in as a owner. Maybe you got involved with a pre-sale situation where the selling dentist stayed on. So I'm sure everybody who's a dentist watching this presentation today has got involved with one of these new graduate transition options. I'm not going to spend any time on this because most of us are past that part of our career. During the growth phase, the dentists do a lot of internal marketing. They do a lot of external marketing. Again, they're trying to grow their practices. They did conventional growth through fee increases, conventional growth through word of mouth and referral sources. Basically, they may be looking to bring an associate into their practice to address some of the issues there. And there's the term practice mergers, which I talked about, where maybe a dentist would consider buying a practice in their area and merge it against their location. Actually, I have a friend of mine who's actually purchased 5 practices throughout his career in his area. He has a very large practice doing well over $2 million a year in production, and he just keeps looking for older dentists in the area whose practices he could purchase and merge them into his location. And sometimes the dentist will retire, and sometimes they'll come into his location. During the maturity phase of dentist career, they do something called the associate launching pad, which I'll talk about briefly in another minute or two. They do something called bigger is better. They do structured co-ownerships, where maybe they have a large practice and they're looking to bring in another owner or co-owner of the practice if it's very large. They do pre-sale programs, where basically they would consider selling their practice and staying on for a period of time as the associate. And they did that term practice mergers again, where the dentist was looking to purchase a practice in their area and merge in their location. Mergers are great ways to get a number of patients into your practice very quickly, and if you can find the right practice and the right terms and the right seller, that can be very profitable. And then through the decline phase of dentist career, they sell, retire, and walk away. They do something called the pre-sale approach we talked about a little while ago. They do practice mergers again. They sell their practice as a merger opportunity to someone in their area, maybe a friend or associate dentist somewhere in the area. They sell their building and refer patients. They do the estate sales when the dentist sadly has passed away, and we're trying to help the family by getting the practice transition. And sometimes they do absolutely nothing, and there's nothing left of their practice, but just some old equipment and a few records and very little production, and we just call these salvage value sales. So as you can see, there are many options and decisions that a dentist will encounter throughout their dental careers. And in this presentation, I'm only going to focus on the options and decisions during the maturity and the decline phase in the stage of your career. So what are your options? Well, you can sell and retire. You can sell and continue working. You can bring an associate into your practice. You can merge with a colleague. You can do some practice management, hire a expensive company to come in and help you to grow your practice and to make it much more profitable. You can do a co-ownership situation where you're looking to bring somebody else in to share responsibilities. We can do what most dentists do, and most dentists do nothing. Throughout their whole career, for as long as you're a dentist, most dentists just basically continue to plod along, making no changes in their practice, just dealing with the practice as it is and not making any decisions or choosing any options that are available to them. So having options is indeed great, but unfortunately many options require decisions, and many of us, especially dentists, are just not good decision makers. Decisions should always be made from a logical perspective, but sadly far too often decisions are made emotionally. Decisions made from an emotional perspective are frequently very destructive. So why is it then that dentists let their emotions enter the decision-making process? There's actually 2 reasons. And interestingly, the first reason is something called the overhead monster. As long as you're in your dental practice, the overhead of your practice, the overhead monster, is a constant problem and a major financial concern. It is truly a money-eating machine. Even as you sit here in this presentation, your overhead is being paid. You're paying all your rents and utilities. You're paying your lab fees. And so that overhead continues no matter what you're doing. And what do you think is the most common career decision for the dentist suffering the effects of the overhead monster? It might surprise you. What they call associateships. Or better, perhaps you should say, handing your practice over on a silver platter. The fact is that dentistry is probably the most associate active of all healthcare professions. Dentists seemingly always want to bring an associate into their practices at some time throughout their dental career. This is likely because most dentists began their careers as an associate, and that's why Paragon thinks the associate concept is so ingrained in the dental profession and the dentist's mind. The typical associateship seldom works out as planned because the relationship rarely has a predefined purpose or outcome, and Paragon finds that approximately 90% of all associateships will fail. But even worse than having only a 10% chance of success, inviting a hired gun associate into your practice can be extremely dangerous and quite costly to you. If you were to examine many of Paragon's case files, you'll find some very, very sad associateship stories, countless stories regarding the loss of many thousands of dollars due to the lack of a formalized plan. like the dentist who paid the entire cost of his nephew to attend dental school, allowed the nephew to become an associate in his practice with just a handshake, and passed every new patient to his nephew for a period of 3 years. Only to be completely devastated one day when the nephew strolled in and announced that he was establishing a new practice across the street. Sadly, he was hiring the receptionist, and to make matters worse, he was marrying the uncle's hygienist. His uncle lost more than 85% of his practice and to start all over again at age 58 years old. The dentist had contacted Paragon and was looking for us to help him to find some other transition option where he could help to grow his practice. The dentist, who allowed 5 different associates to work in his practice without a contract, and watched each leave a year or so later, taking numerous patients and staff with them. This poor dentist has lost thousands of dollars many times over in practice value. Yet strangely enough, this dentist is very proud of their nickname, and that nickname is called something called the Associate Launching Pad. And actually, I met a dentist a while back. This dentist had a very large practice, had 10 operatories, was using 5 or 6 operatories for his staff, and had 4 operatories sitting empty. Well, he had very high overhead because of the extra space was sitting there empty, so this dentist decided he wanted to bring an associate into the practice. And this graph is very characteristic of what I met with a dentist. What he did is, during the growth phase of his career, he went out and hired an associate, and the associate came into the practice, and obviously it addressed some of the overhead, and the associate left the practice after a period of time. What happens here is the production went down. The dentist decided he was going to look for a much better associate this time, was going to do a much more in-depth interview process, hired the next associate, the practice went up, production, of course, went up, and the associate left, and the same cycle started all over again. This particular dentist I was talking about was near 70 years old, had only 1,400 active patients in his practice, and when I asked him where those associates were, he proudly announced that one was across the street, as I mentioned, one was down the street, one was around the corner, and sadly, they all had taken patients with them every time they left the practice, and occasionally they had taken some staff members. And yet he had contacted me as a Paragon transition consultant to come in and look for another associate for him. And his practice had suffered very severely, and again, nearing 70 years old with only 1,400 active patients, and starting the cycle all over again. So why is the dental associateship failure rate so high at 90%? Well, dentists generally bring an associate into their practices for all the wrong reasons. As you already know, the financial success of any dental practice is dependent upon the new patient flow. At some point, most dentists discover that their new patient flow is not what it once was. Next, they further determine that they're not attracting the younger patients or younger families any longer. And I think as all of us get a little older and our hair gets a little grayer and we start losing more of that hair and get more wrinkles, our patients tend to age with us. What happens is that you're seeing now your patients' children and grandchildren, and the younger families moving into your area are looking for younger dentists because they figure you're going to be retiring relatively soon, and so you don't attract those younger patients into your practice anymore. So dentists will assume that by adding a younger doctor to their practice, they'll start attracting those younger patients again. They'll address some of their overhead issues, and the profits and production will increase. And quite honestly, there is some real logic to this thinking. Patients do tend to gravitate towards doctors and dentists near their own age. Therefore, by adding a younger dentist to your practice, you will indeed increase patient flow as well as increase your profits and production and address some of your overhead issues. But this seemingly logical thinking is what causes the problems that lead to failed associateships in the first place. Associates are frequently brought into practices that do not have enough patients to support more than one doctor. I'm going to be talking about patient numbers here very shortly. Actually, associates are often brought into practices that do not have enough new patient flow to support even the host doctor of the practice. The associate will be forced to build a practice within the host doctor's practice. It's a recipe for disaster when two doctors work together in a practice environment that forces competition for the same patients. There's always serious problems on the horizon. It gets even worse. These relationships often begin with a simple handshake or at best an extremely inadequate or ambiguous contract. They never address the long-term relationship. The common language found in all these failed associateship relationships is, come on in, let's see if we like each other, let's see if we can work well together, let's see if the staff likes you, let's see if you like the staff, let's see if the patients like you. But don't worry, we'll figure out something out down the road that's fair to both of us. And these relationships always start with a simple handshake. So what's a broad stroke recap of a typical associateship? About a 1 to 3 year relationship, with the associate generating the bulk of the new patient flow, with no contract in place to address the interests of either doctor. And it happens one day that the doctors finally begin discussing a transition of the practice. And of course, without a solid contract, these talks quickly become me-focused. They begin to intensely negotiate the transition, and the relationship is destroyed. What became a friendly relationship in the beginning typically ends very poorly in the end. 90% of the time, the relationship will end abruptly. The associate will leave. Sometimes it's very unpleasant, taking patients and staff with them. They'll move either across the street or down the street, and definitely affect the doctor's practice. Now, sadly, the host doctor will face the same problem that started the cycle, looking for another associateship. The financial hardship of these ambiguous ships, we call them, what we call ambiguous relationships, could have been avoided. The doctors have simply set up a proper relationship in the beginning with an appropriate contract. An ambiguous ship is an associate relationship with no predetermined plan, or it will happen in the event of either a buy-in or buy-out. An ambiguous ship is similar to boarding an airplane without knowing the destination. Ambiguous ships always are relatively short-term relationships, regardless of the intentions of both doctors. And I will tell you, the intentions typically are very good in the beginning. We start with a handshake, everybody has their arm around each other, there's a lot of smiles, and these relationships do start with good intentions by both doctors. But sadly, ambiguous ships frequently end up a complete disaster and typically cost both doctors a lot of time, money, and stress. But I really don't want to leave you at this point saying that all associateships will fail. In fact, a properly structured associateship that eliminates the ambiguity of a hired gun relationships can be an excellent transition plan for many practices or for many dentists who are getting near retirement. So as long as the relationship is structured properly, bringing an associate into your practice is very, very important and could be very important to you at your career, end of your career. There are 6 key elements that are involved in a properly structured associateship. And let me talk about these in detail. Number 1 and number 6, large enough patient base and how they're going to treat growth are the most common reasons that we find that associates will leave the practice and why they don't last very long. Let's look at these. First, it's critical that the practice has enough active patients to accommodate another set of doctor hands. So this is very important. Let me explain this to you, and maybe you all should write this down. Paragon has found that an average dentist needs roughly 300 active patients for every 1 doctor and 1 hygiene day in the office. So for a dentist to be busy 4 days a week in their office with 4 days of hygiene, they need roughly 1,200 active patients in their practice. Now, Paragon considers an active patient any patient who has been in their practice 1 time or more in the past 24 months. So I would suggest that over the next few months, when you're on vacation, you might want to go in and have your staff find out how many active patients truly are in your practice. Now, I've had dentists tell me that they have 5,000 or 6,000 active patients. But what they do is they print a report out, and that's all the patients that have ever been in their practice since that software program was put into place. And that's not truly an active patient. So I have to find out how many people have been in 1 time or more in the past 24 months. But what happens is a practice would have, like the dentist I talked about previously, had only 1,400 patients in his practice, and he was looking for a full-time associate. Well, if you need 300 patients for every doctor day in the office, and you're already working 4 days a week, and you want to bring an associate in 4 days a week, you need roughly 2,400 active patients. This doctor only had enough active patients possibly for 1 day a week for the associate, and he was trying to bring a full-time associate into his practice. So if you want to bring an associate in 1 day a week, your practice should have a minimum of 1,500 active patients, 2 days a week, 1,800 active patients, and so on and so on. Now, before we talked about a pre-sale approach. Now, if you decide that you'd like to maybe think about down during retirement to sell your practice as a pre-sale, and you'd like to stay on a day or 2 a week in the practice and work as the associate for the purchaser of your practice, your practice would need 1,500 or 1,800 active patients. If your practice only has 1,200 active patients, then basically you'd have to be a walk-away seller because there would not be enough patients in there because the buyer of your practice is going to need the minimum of 1,200 active patients. So It's very, very important how many patients are in your practice, and everybody should know that number because we do ask that question when we do an appraisal analysis of the practice, and it's very, very critical. So how many patients does your practice have, and is there enough to accommodate another set of doctor hands? Secondly, we must have a well-designed plan that considers the short-term, the mid-term, and the long-term needs and goals of both doctors, both the host doctor and the associate. We must have a comprehensive contract that clearly governs and protects the plan, including very strong restrictive covenant language. Now, we see too many associate relationships where there is 1 year and 3 miles of the covenant not to compete, and that is not enough strength in the restrictive covenant language to protect the practice. When I did all my transitions as a Paragon transition consultant, I would do a minimum of 3 to 5 years and 10 to 15 miles. Now, in rural practices where the patients may drag long distances, I did them where I did 5 years and 30 miles or 40 miles because patients come from long distances. Well, if you're a dentist in downtown Manhattan, it may be 6 months and 3 blocks because Manhattan is a very unusual circumstance all up to itself. But I think it's important to understand that the average restrictive covenant should be somewhere between 3 and 5 years and somewhere between 10 and 15 miles. The courts typically will uphold these types of transitions structured with the restrictive covenant at those time and distance parameters. So very, very important. You have to have a good, strong restrictive covenant. Fourth, you must decide if the end result will be a transition into a co-ownership relationship or into full practice ownership. Fifth, you must decide if transition is full or partial, will be immediate, or will occur over time. And lastly, you must account for the practice growth that's taken place. So it's equitably valued for both the seller and the associate in case of either a buy-in or buy-out. So what do I mean? Let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's say a practice is worth $500,000 when an associate starts in the practice. The associate works in the practice for a period of years, has helped to grow the practice, and now the practice has a value of $1 million several years down the road. Now it comes to sell the practice, and of course the host doctor wants to sell it at the new $1 million value. Well, obviously the associate is not going to pay the $1 million value because they said they've been in there working to help to grow the practice. They've been seeing the emergency patients, they've been working weekends and evenings, seeing all the emergencies, really helping to grow the practice. They want to buy in at the $500,000 level, which isn't fair to the host doctor. The host doctor has supplied all the patients, the staff, all the equipment, the supplies, the paid lab fees, has done everything they can to help the associate be successful. So what Paragon has found is we evaluate the practice at what the value was when the associate started. We come up with a value and a percentage of the collections to determine the value of the practice. Then we evaluate the practice at the time of the transition using the exact same formula, the exact same percentage, and come up with a new value. What we do is we average those two values together, and the associate buys into the practice or buys the practice at the average of the two values. This way, the associate has been given some sweat, we call it sweat equity, for helping to grow the practice, and the host doctor has been given equity for helping to make the associate successful. We see too many relationships that fall apart because both of them have unrealistic ideas of what the practice is worth, but by averaging the two together, it seems to solve most of the problems and keeps everybody very happy. So again, number 1 and number 6, having enough patients in your practice and how you structure the buildup of equity in the practice is very, very critical. So by clearly defining and setting the specific parameters of each of these critical points, equity associateships can be a wonderful asset to anybody's practice, especially as you're near later stages of your career. So as opposed to 90% failure rate as a hired gun associate, a equitably structured associateship relationship that leads to ownership or co-ownership has a virtual 100% chance of success rate if done properly and it's structured properly. Well, as the first reason emotional decisions was the overhead monster, the second reason is something called burnout. I think every dentist has felt burnout throughout their career. You know, work one night and so it looks like the dentist in this picture right here. So what do you think is the most common decision that dentists make to suffer the effects of burnout? Do you think it's retirement? Do you think it's ambiguous? How about going back to school, become a dental school professor? Maybe rededication to dentistry, or career change. So what do you think is the most common thing that Paragon finds when dentists are dealing with the effects of burnout? Interestingly, it's rededication to dentistry. What do I mean by that? Well, it's a philosophy that dentists have that is called bigger is better. It seems to be the dental profession's universal solution to both burnout and boredom. The common thought is, if I have to remain a dentist, then I plan to make as much money as I possibly can in as short a period as I possibly can, so I can get out as soon as I possibly can. So what is the bigger is better philosophy? Well, these dentists will go out and they'll hire a high-profile practice management consultant team to come into their practices and help them grow their practices, help them make them very profitable and productive. They'll remodel their existing office, or they'll build an ultra-modern facility. As I mentioned as dentist earlier, we had a 10-operatory office and was only using 5 or 6 of the operatories. They'll upgrade their equipment and buy all brand new. They'll increase their marketing efforts to try to attract new patients. They'll hire a team of associates to come into the office to address the overhead in the practices. They'll increase and retrain their staff through a lot of continuing education classes. And then hopefully they'll watch their production and profits soar in this type of practices. But is the bigger is better approach really the answer to financial freedom in the latter stages of a dental career? Well, the owners of these practices are literally working themselves to death, hoping to one day find a way out alive because of massive overhead the debt they've created. And we see this situation all the time where dentists will contact Paragon. We'll have a situation where they have this huge building, a great overhead, and they have a small practice, and they want us to help transition these practices because they literally are working themselves to death because of the overhead and the bills they've created for themselves. So Paragon's philosophy and advice to you is basically practice for a living. Don't live to practice. Run your career. You've been very successful at it as it is. Don't make these mistakes that we see dentists make and building large offices in the latter stages of your career, or hire these high-profile practice management teams, or hire too many associates come into your office and structure them the wrong way. Next, I think it's very important that each of you know what a dental practice is really worth. Possibly you're attending this presentation tonight to find out what is the value of my dental practice. There are actually many methods you use to assign a fair market value to a dental practice. But quite frankly, the assigned value means absolutely nothing unless you can attract a buyer who is ready, willing, and able to pay the established fair market value for your dental practice. Paragon analyzes various risk factors to arrive at a price that considers the opposing viewpoint of both seller and buyer alike. And again, we're a dual representation company, so we have to look at both the buyer and the seller's aspects. We carefully analyze that patient base. Remember, we talked about how many patients, active patients, do you have in your practice. That's very, very important. We have to know exactly how many patients are in your practice. We also analyze your specific income sources. Are these fee-for-service patients? Are these PPO patients? Are they capitation patients? Are they Medicaid patients? We look at where is this income of your practice? What is your patient base? Where is the income coming from these patient base? We also look at the eternal growth potential of your practice. Are you referring out a lot of specialty work? Are you referring out all your endo? Are you doing all your endo? Are you doing ortho in your practice? Are you doing perio? Are you doing pedo? How strong is your hygiene department? Is hygiene producing 33% of your practice like most practices should be? So looking at the internal growth potential of these practices. So very, very important situations when we evaluate and analyze and appraise practices. The fair market value of dental practice historically falls somewhere between 50 and 90% of the most recent year's collection. So what is a 90% practice? Well, a 90% practice would probably be a practice with 5,000 active fee-for-service patients, maybe 10 operatories of brand new equipment in a great location in your town or in your state, with a very reasonable overhead and a terrific hygiene department. A 50% or a 40% practice might be a very small rural practice that has maybe one dentist, one operatory or two operatories, maybe just several hundred patients, maybe a lot of PPO patients, maybe one or two staff members in a very small rural area of your state. If you want a number, I would say that most dental practices would sell somewhere between 65 and 75% of the most recent year's collections, but some sell at 90%, some sell at 50%. The thing that Paragon struggles with all the time is dentists always tell us, young dentists, especially out of dental school, that they're only willing to pay 62% of the average of the last 3 years' collections, what they were taught in dental school. Well, being from Michigan, the state that deals a lot of cars, I tell my young buyers that that was really true, that every dental practice should sell for 60% of the most recent 3 years' collections, then every car on the road should sell for exactly the same price. But that's not true. Some cars are Lexuses that sell for a very high price. Some cars are Ford Escorts that sell for very low prices. And not every practice sells for exactly the same values. Some practices should be selling at 90% or even a little higher. Some practices should be sold at 40% or even a little bit lower. So it's always a very difficult thing that we deal with young buyers who have this 62% number in their head. So every practice sells for different value. They fall between 50 and 90%, but I gave you somewhere between 65 and 75% of the most recent year's collections is typically what we would see in most dental practices out there. Dental practices are valued very heavily in regards to buyers' expected cash flow. It's very important. I think that the banks look at this very heavily. How much is a young buyer going to make after debt service in the dental practice? Paragon feels that young buyers should make somewhere between $100,000 to $150,000 after paying debt service, because these young dentists have to pay their student loans, they've got to raise their family, they have to pay their mortgage payments and their car payments. And so if the practice does not generate enough income, then obviously the value of the practice has to diminish a little bit, because this practice has to generate somewhere between $100,000 to $150,000 for this buyer after debt service. So the banks and Paragon look very closely at how much money is this practice going to generate. Of equal importance is the transition timing for the selling dentist to receive the peak market value of his or her dental practice. Selling at peak market value is important. Sadly, Paragon estimates that less than 10% of dentists sell or transition their practice at the peak value, and that's somewhere between 50 and 65 years old. Sadly, many dentists sell or transition down here, and sadly, real sadly, some dentists don't sell or transition at all. They'll just walk away or die, and the practices actually have very, very little value. So the cost of waiting to transition or to sell your practice could easily cost you many millions of dollars. So waiting too long to sell or transition carries three very costly consequences, and let's look at these. Significant changes in the market conditions, disability, sickness, and death, and the miracle of compounding interest. Let's look at each one of these briefly. A major downturn in the local economy is an example of a significant change in market conditions. When patients lose their jobs or even just their dental insurance, practice production begins to drop. As production drops, so does the fair market value of their practice. In Michigan, the state I live in, several years ago, General Motors eliminated all their dental insurance for their retiree salary people and even some of their salaried current active workers. And that was over 300,000 people lost their dental insurance in Michigan. That was a huge change in the dental market at a downturn when people lost their dental insurance because of a downturn in the economy. One silver lining is the negative impact of a down economy can often be localized within one state. The practice in one area may not be as adversely affected as the practice in another, and I find that here, that in more rural areas, that they're not quite as affected as more urban areas. Urban areas, there's a lot more concentration of dentists. They rely more heavily on dental insurances, where the more rural practices, there's typically more patients. They don't typically always have dental insurance, and so they're not quite as affected by the downturn in the economy. And hopefully your practice is one of those practices that has escaped the loss of market value due to a down economy. But there is one major change that's in the dental market is guaranteed to impact every dentist who waits too long to sell or transition his or her dental practice. And it's the baby boomers. A baby boomer is a person born between 1946 and 1964. The first wave of baby boomers turned 65 in 2011. What does it mean in the dental market? Well, interestingly, the following graph is found in every state of the country right now. I find this very interesting. The American Dental Association agrees with Paragon's database that 55% of all dentists in the country are 55 years and older. So the impact is kind of obvious with down the road when there's more sellers and fewer buyers, the practice values have to come down somewhat. Right now, dental practices are getting the maximum we can get for them. But I'm telling all my clients that in several years from now, when there's a lot of baby boomers selling their dental practices, the values are going to come down. I ask everybody in the seminars I give, how many of your friends that are all the same age as you are all still working? And would one of you say to each other, well, I'm going to work another 3 to 5 years, and I'm going to sell my practice down the road, and you all have exactly the same philosophy, and they're all going to be selling at exactly the same time. So what's the cause of this issue? Well, will there be fewer buyers? Well, in the 1970s, the dental schools were graduating around 6,300 active patients. 6,300 dentists every year for dental schools around the country. Now in 2010, they're only graduating roughly 4,800. Now the ADA is addressing this issue. They understand that there are not enough young buyers coming in to address all the baby boomers, and so they're making efforts to increase this number. So by 2020, they hope to come close what the numbers were back in the 1970s. So why are there fewer dentists? Well, if you look at this slide here, you'll see that there's a number of dental schools have closed since 1986. As every one of these dental schools have closed, that's 4 years of dentists who did not graduate from the schools. And if you can think of how many dentists could have graduated from these schools over the last 15 or 20 years, you can see that's a huge amount of young dentists that are not there in the dental market right now. Now, the good news is the ADA is addressing this issue, and some of these schools are currently up and running, and some are on the drawing boards and will be up in the next few years, and some in the next few years down the road. But interestingly, every one of these schools has to graduate, has to have 4 years of classes, and it takes 4 years to graduate their very first dentist. So it's going to take another 10 or 15 years for all these schools to be up and running and to be able to graduate 4 years of dental students coming out after 4 years of education. Also, what happens with the baby boomers is that the retirement age has gone up, where dentists are working longer now from what they were back in 2004. And as they've worked longer, what's happened is their numbers have gone down substantially because the economy has gone down. I'm trying to find the most current numbers from the ADA, but they're not available right now. But ideally, you should have done a transition to practice back in 06 or 07 when dentists were making the peak amount of dollars. We should have to update this slide relatively soon. Next, the issue is disability, sickness, or death. Well, just because your practice is worth $500,000 today does not mean it'll be worth $500,000 tomorrow. Your practice has value today only because you are there to personally produce the bulk of the practice income. Death normally results in an immediate 50% drop in practice value. The remaining value being lost in 3 to 6 months. And sadly, what took you an entire career to accumulate is lost in 6 months or less. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, doing a estate sale is very difficult, and these practices have to be sold immediately. Because a rural practice, sometimes they're never sold, and the dentist basically, there's nothing left to transition. So what is that you say? Well, your colleagues will pitch in and help run your practice, help your family run your practice until it can be sold. Let me think again about that, because actually, the only reason your practice may retain some limited market value for a few months after your death is because your colleagues haven't finished robbing your practice of its most important asset, that's your patient base. Yes, your colleagues will come in and help your family. Their intentions are very good. They think they're going to come in and they're going to help to run the practice. But what happens is the patients know that you're deceased. You're no longer there. They're looking for a dentist. And the dentist is coming in. The dentist has a practice somewhere in your vicinity. The patient may get some dental work done by this dentist or group of dentists. They say, you know what, I think I'm going to just transfer records over to that office, because I need a dentist, and I don't know who's going to be buying this practice down the road, so I'll just transfer my record over to the new doctor. So what happens over a period of weeks and months is these patients tend to leave the practice, and after about 6 months, there's nothing left in the practice. The patients have typically transferred out and need somebody to clean their teeth and need somebody to take care of them, and the practices have very, very limited value. Now, again, these dentists are coming in, are really meaning to help. And their intentions are very good because they know that your family needs some help, but it just doesn't work that way. Paragon finds that rarely the patients left in this practice 6 months down the road. And finally, the miracle of compounding interest. You know, compound interest is by far the most powerful financial force that you have at your disposal today. Not selling or transitioning your practice years in advance of your desired retirement age can easily be the most costly financial mistake you can make. So watch this magic. If you sold your practice for $500,000 today and you invested at 10% for the next 5 years, it would grow to $800,000. You only made 7% of your money. It would only grow to $700,000, and even 5%, you would grow to $638,000. But then just kind of laugh at me and they say, well, how do I ever get 10% on my money? If you look at the stock market from 1930 through 2012, the stock market has averaged 9.8% throughout all those years. Yes, some years the market is down and some years the market is up, but on the average, the stock market does right around 10% on the average. So if you have a very good financial advisor and you can get a well-balanced portfolio, over a period of time, you should be able to equal somewhere between 5 and 10% of return on your money. Now, if you're only looking to put this money in CDs right now, where the interest rates are less than 1% or 2%, obviously the money's not going to grow as fast, but if you have a very good financial person to help you, you should be able to get between 5 and 10% on your money easily. So selling at peak market value is very critical. So selling a practice at peak value is a smart move and should be instrumental towards helping you have a younger and or more comfortable retirement. Paragon has a pre-sale program we have designed specifically for this purpose. A pre-sale program is where a seller converts his practice equity or her practice equity into usable cash now and continues to work in the practice as long as he or she desires. It is the ultimate quality of life program. Lets you have your cake and eat it too. The benefits of pre-sale, as opposed to waiting until you're close to retirement in age to sell, let's say a walk-away sale, is you'll have more time with your family to relax and enjoy your activities. You'll be able to sell your practice now before anything can reduce the value. You're converting your practice equity into an interest or an asset-bearing account where it'll grow over a period of time. You're free from your practice overhead forever and ever. Your practice is sold against, right now, it's protected against disability or death. You continue to join an annual income in your personal production because, again, you're in their office working as the associate of the new buyer. You have the freedom to decide when you want to retire, how many days a week you want to work. Freedom to treat who you want and do only the procedures you want. In our contracts, basically, if you do not want to see any pediatric patients or you don't want to see any perio patients or any oral surgery patients or endo patients, we put that in the contract. If you want to work 1 or 2 days a week, if your practice is big enough and can accommodate that, then that's what we'll put in the contract. This is all spelled out ahead of time. We've actually witnessed many pre-sale sellers maintain their production even though they've reduced their clinical time. From over 4,000 transitions that Paragon has done, we found 2 very important rules here. One is the 80-20 business rule, and number 2 is the various freedoms that pre-sale sellers enjoy. What is the 80-20 business rule? Well, it's a simple rule of all businesses, and that is that 80% of your practice income is generated by approximately 20% of your patients, and 20% of your patient base produces 80% of your income. Every one of you have patients out there who basically come in every 6 months, every 3 months, get their teeth cleaned. You recommend treatment to them, and basically they accept your treatment. And so a very small portion of your practice produces a large part of your income. So as you know, a dentist does not earn the same amount of dollars on an hour-by-hour basis. An hour of composites doesn't yield the same dollars as an hour of crown preps. But unfortunately, when you're only doctor in your office, you cannot pick and choose those procedures. But when you consider how much income you can generate on just those right patients, and you have suddenly the freedom to work only in the patients that you choose, perform only the procedures that you choose, and generally your attitude is better because of a whole lot less stress because you no longer own the practice. We frequently see pre-sale sellers who continue the same production levels even though they reduce their clinical time by as much as 50%. So if everything is so great, why does every dentist sell as a pre-sale? Well, there's three primary reasons, and here they are, and let's go through them one at a time. I'm not ready to give up control because I like being the boss. What is it exactly that makes you as a dentist feel like you're the boss? It's responsibility repairing or replacing your equipment, perhaps hiring and training new staff. I guess we'd be paying the utilities and the rents even when you're on vacation. Maybe it's a frustration, a confusion you feel when an employee or employees call in sick. Perhaps it's your scheduling coordinator tells you who you have to work on and what procedures you do each day. So the fact each of you have to see old Mrs. Jones, and she absolutely ruins your day when you see her name on the schedule. And I'm sure everybody out there has a Mrs. Jones that in your practice that you actually dread the minute you see their name on your schedule. Well, there's a major difference between control and responsibility. Control is being able to stroll into your office one morning and block off a couple months for a well-deserved vacation. You can't realistically do that as a practice owner because actually your overhead would just eat you alive. And that's why we see that this will only take no more than 1 or 2 weeks vacation at a time because their overhead is so high. Secondly, how do you know your practice has reached peak value? Well, only you know when your practice has reached peak value, and if you're very honest with yourself, do you have enough drive and energy and ambition to grow your practice in any year to offset the loss incurred by not selling? One thing that we do know for certain is even if you still have the will and the drive and the ambition, there's a certain point in every dentist's career where it's physically impossible to grow enough in any one year to offset the cost of waiting another year to sell. For example, waiting just one more year to sell would cause your retirement fund to be worth $100,000 less because of having 1 year less of compound interest. Well, realistically, you'd have to do $150,000 of production in any one given year to offset the loss of that $100,000 of income you're generating. $50,000 of actual increase in production in a mature practice is actually pretty unrealistic in today's economy. Waiting one more year to sell will easily cost more than most dentists ever realize. Seller transition here, not here. And finally, if you get work with another doctor, well, quite honestly, I haven't got a very good response to that objection. However, if I could accumulate another $1 million towards my retirement and be in a position to be able to retire 5 to 10 years earlier and work 40 or 50% less for the rest of my career, I think I could learn to adapt. In conclusion, Paragon is a national network of well-trained consultants who are ready to assist you in identifying your transition needs, goals, and options. It starts with our complimentary consultation and ends with a win-win transition that is specifically structured to satisfy the needs and goals of all parties. There's so much more that must transpire between your complimentary consultation and a transition closing. Your Paragon consultant is only a tip of the spear. Actually, our network assists with many individuals will play a significant role in all transitions. We have a dentist like myself and other consultants around the country who understand dentistry and understand the dental profession. We have attorneys who are involved in our contracts that help us to structure those properly. We have accountants who help us with all the financing issues. We have healthcare administrators who work within Paragon and the organization. And one box is not here. We have a number of national lending institutions that we work with that help us to finance these transitions. So the fifth box should be a well-groomed team of financial people who help us also. Paragon, we are not practice brokers. We are dual-representation transition consultants. We bring buyers and sellers together equitably. We serve as mediators and facilitators. We have but one goal in mind, a fair and equitable transition. Paragon's primary mission is to listen, evaluate, and propose a transition plan that is unique to each client's particular personal and practice situation. Dentists who transition in time to maximize their vast benefits are truly in a minority. Please don't be one of them. We hope you've gotten some valuable information, transition information from this presentation today. To contact Paragon or find a Paragon consultant in your area, contact us either at info@paragon.us.com or call us at 866-898-1867. We look forward to hearing from you. I hope you've learned something from this presentation today, and thank you for listening.